wanted Shirley to come and tell us about the history of the Pemberton Airport. It's this huge piece of infrastructure in the Pemberton Valley, and there's, you know, someone was just saying to me, no one really thinks about the airport. Like, we kind of forget that it's there. But I know that Shirley doesn't forget that it's there. And there's quite a history attached to the airport. It actually was one of the biggest funded projects in the Pemberton Valley. There were a ton of funders and lots of government funding. And I know from just some conversations with Shirley that that had to do with her personally going to Victoria and getting to know certain people in the ministries of transportation and such to get this idea of an airport on the radar. But before I get into letting Shirley tell you about the airport, I just wanted to give you a bit of an introduction about who she is. She's from Chilliwack. She actually says she started off in Kelowna, but grew up in Chilliwack and became a teacher, went to teacher's college, and her first placement was up in 100 Mile House. And I hear this is where she met up with George. And then soon after that, she ended up on this adventure off to Pemberton. And she'll tell you exactly why it is that she got involved in lots of local projects and as well as municipal politics after she arrived in Pemberton. And when was that? What year did you come to Pemberton, you and George?
The end of August 1964. So in 1976, probably late 1976, there were a group of aviation enthusiasts who got together and formed a flying club. I think it was 1976, that's what Don and Ralph is saying. And they began their search for a location to build an airstrip. There was a little airstrip, a private one, that Laurie Talbot had up the valley. That was on private property. So with the guidance of a Transport Canada individual called George Dungy, who stayed with us during our development for many years, they selected a location for Pemberton Airport. And Don Wonfong recalls that there were 4 enthusiasts, not so much the flying club, but 4 who put their money together and their energies, and they actually built the 3,000-foot airstrip, the 4 of them. And they built it at the base of Mount Prairie between Pemberton Creek, the Green River, and the Lillooet River as it stands today. So shortly after that came the first federal works grant to build a new bridge across the Pemberton Creek. And George Underhill, who was the mayor at the time, was instrumental in working on that project. And that gave better access into the airport property. So volunteer help continued with the airport development until 1993. So the village applied, first of all, for a license of occupation, and as time went on, it was a lease, and then it was a crown grant of the airport lands. And the first grant they received was $10,000, and it was to do a feasibility study in regards to developing an airstrip or an airport. And at the time, the regional district got some additional money, and they expanded that grant so that they would look at the whole corridor, Pemberton, Worcester, and Squamish, because this was at the point where Worcester was starting to develop as a resort community. And the government wanted to find an airport that would service Worcester. So they looked at all 3 communities, and the result was Pemberton was the best of the 3. It wasn't ideal by any means, but it was the best. So that's where the government decided they would put their money, was into the Pemberton Airport. So this is when the funds began to flow. So it was fairly easy for us to secure funding after this point for the airport, mainly because we had so much volunteer work. In every application that we made, we always listed all the volunteer work that was done in the project before. So the village was very supportive also of the BC Aviation Council. I know Nikki mentioned my many trips to Victoria. On the BC Aviation Council, they had an airports committee, which I chaired for a number of years, that had representatives from both the federal and provincial government. So when there was funding to be allotted to the various communities throughout the province, it certainly helped Pemberton to have a voice and sort of an in on the airports committee. So early in the development, I had the opportunity to go to Aspen, Colorado with the president of Air BC, and we looked at the operation that Rocky Mountain Air had to service the ski area in that area. And they used the Dash 7, and they had a microwave landing system. So we thought, it looks just like Pemberton. This type of system would probably work in Pemberton. So the village worked closely with Air BC and de Havilland, the company that manufactured the Dash 7, as we continued our airport development. And each step along the way, the village engineered every part of the project for the airport. We engineered the gravel that was laid down. We engineered the taxiway, the airport apron. Anything that was done, it was engineered and done to the highest standards that we could at the time. And it was to accommodate the Dash 7 aircraft. So first came the gravel runway, followed by a flood in 1982. Then we brought three-phase power in to the airport and telephone. Then the runway was extended and we put additional gravel down. Next came some more funding to pave the airstrip, and another flood came. Then we paved the runway and we extended it to 4,000 feet. The MLS engineering began at this point, and it was done with a company out of Sydney, Nova Scotia called Micronav. And the equipment was manufactured, and it included a number of sites throughout the valley. We had 5 sites altogether. There was one at the end of Harrow Road, which was a non-directional beacon. We had another site at Clover Road, where the Kims live, and that was where we had some distance measuring equipment. We had equipment at the airport itself, and we had another site on the Duffy Lake Road and one down Lillooet Lake. So you had an approach for the aircraft coming into the airport, and if they had to make a missed approach and couldn't land, they would be guided out of the Pemberton Valley. And this MLS installation was also used as a demonstration project at Expo 86. Expo 86, for those that were around, remember it was a transportation exposition. So there was a very large model of the Pemberton Valley that de Havilland made and showed the actual approach and missed approach. And we did have that for years. It sat stored in the terminal building at the airport, and it seems to have disappeared. So I'm on the search to find what happened to it. So the airport development continued. Transport Canada installed a weather station. In fact, if you go to the airport, you'll see a trailer sort of on stilts. That was where the weather station was, and the Transport Canada gave that to the village and the fenced area as well. They took that equipment, they put it into storage, and it was going to be brought out again if we needed to reactivate the weather station. And ESSO also installed a state-of-the-art fuel installation, which the village later had removed. And at this point, we pre-designed the terminal building. And there's actually a picture of the terminal building that was designed by a company called Busby Bridger Architects, who are well known in the Vancouver area today. Next, we designed our taxiways and turning Ds. Like the airport was sort of done in stages. We did sort of one thing at a time. So we secured funding after they were designed to pave the taxiway and the turning Ds. Next, we had to do some security fencing around the airport. Then we constructed the helipad and extended the apron. Then we did a land use zoning plan. There's a copy of it here. And then we preloaded the area for the terminal building. The Ministry of Forest did a helitack base, which is still in existence today and used by the Ministry of Forest. And also in anticipation of international travelers to the area, we applied to the federal government for Customs and Immigration Service. So we were sort of thinking ahead. We were sort of actually a bit ahead of our time. And Vancouver Airport, YVR, was installing a new baggage system. So because of the contacts again at the Aviation Council, we asked if we could have the old turnstiles. So they put those in storage for us. I don't know whatever happened to all these things that went in storage. They're probably still in storage somewhere. The Pemberton Secondary School built the cabana that you see there, the little picnic area, the covered picnic area. And we also had the engineering class from Canadian Forces Base Chilliwack. As a classroom project, they designed a number of terminal buildings with all the working drawings. It was a classroom project for them, and we never built the terminal building, but it was an excellent exercise for them, and it was interesting for us too. Then we also had a number of official openings. I like openings and I like to cook, so we would have chili and cake. Every opening had not a wedding cake, had an airport cake of some sort. So all this development took place between 1978 and 1993. And the last grant that was awarded in 1993 was actually for hydro and telephone to the lease lots, which never happened. So unfortunately, Canada wouldn't certify the microwave landing system, and it ended up, the company ended up selling twice, And in 1999, Canadian Marconi bought Micronav Limited from Siemens, which is a company from Europe. So the MLS system quickly became obsolete and as new technology emerged. And the village actually ended up acquiring the buildings that were associated with that system. There was all the equipment that I mentioned earlier. And the museum actually has 2 of those, so part of that history is here, which pleases me. The archives building is one of the MLS little buildings, and also the little storage shed is another one. So the airport was developed to service Pemberton and the surrounding area, and it was made possible with funding provided by the Ministry of Transportation provincially, and the Federal Ministry of Transport, and the Department of Regional and Industrial Expansion. In fact, most of our MLS funding, over $1 million, came from the Department of Regional and Industrial Expansion. So in total, the total investment to 1993, there was about $250,000 of volunteer labor and equipment. I used to keep track of every hour that was spent at the airport. But the total investment in that airport up to 1993 was $6,298,734. So it's a pretty big investment. So I always felt that an airport is part of the community's transportation structure, and that we should be blessed that we had such wonderful government support to develop the Pemberton Airport. And although we have not seen an air service occur at the airport, it's been a great asset to the community. It's been invaluable for firefighting, for forest fires, medevac, and actually 2 years ago I was medevaced out, so I personally appreciated that. The military training exercises we've had there, and for tourism and business. And it's my hope that the Pemberton Airport will continue to develop a valuable asset.
Can I ask you why you wanted to get involved in such a big project when you were on council? Was it because of the expo focus, or that you just felt the timing was right?
The expo focus triggered the MLS. And I really don't know sort of where that sort of started. Like, we had an expo committee actually, and I think just knowing it was a transportation, knowing we were developing the airport at the time, we thought, how can we get even more money for the airport? So, and then the MLS system, that came up, I think, at the Aviation Council. I mean, the meetings were monthly, so you were always talking aviation with everybody, so, yeah. And I think that's probably where it came from.
It seems like it would be a tremendous amount of work, because then Pemberton population was 200 people or so?
It was not too many more than that. Well, when we first started developing the airport, like after the Flying Club and, Don and his group got in there, the very first presentation I did was at a tourism conference, talking about the opportunities that an airport would bring to Pemberton and the area. And I can remember doing quite a large presentation, and I think that was sort of the beginning of the development of the airport. And they could see that Pemberton was enthusiastic, and there was a lot of, the volunteer component definitely helped that airport get built.
That was the key.
That was the key.
You just brought out the list of hours. Here's all the people, here's all the hours.
Yeah. I mean, that airport was built the same as the golf course was built. All this machinery came out, and all the local farmers, and just did it en masse. I mean, that's how they built the golf course too, initially.
Were there any other sites in the Pemberton Valley that were earmarked for an airport before that site was established?
Another area that probably would have been ideal is what we call Dill Strait Search, the farming area, but that was farmland. I mean, mind you, the airport is basically farmland as well. It was log, but that was another area that probably was a little bit better because it's a little farther away from Mount Currie.
Oh.
What year was it that the snowbirds performed here?
It was after 1993, and I remember because I was still on the airport committee then, probably about 1996. I'm just sort of guessing. I think it was about then, wasn't it?
It was about then.
Yeah.
So I wasn't
It was a few
really
years after I wasn't on council.
Mm-hmm.
And they said they would never come back again.
So did you start this project right your first year as mayor, your first
No.
term? No.
I got on council actually because my neighbor, who you've had speak to before, Bob Priest, said to me one day, why don't you run for council? And because I was asking about, there doesn't seem to be anything for families. Like, I wanted to see a parade or something like that. So the federal government at that time had sent, I got on council, and right after I got on council, there was a little thing that was put on my desk about Canada Week from the government, and it wasn't grant money that first year, but there was after that. And it just sounded, that would be fun. We could get all the various organizations to do something. We could have a parade. This is the original bridge that ended up being replaced.
Across the
It's
creek?
a logging, yeah, this is Pemberton Creek.
Oh my God.
So they needed one that's a little bit stronger to get the equipment across, so. This is the first plane land, that's Jimmy Decker's plane landing on the grass strip.
And that's
Cleared.
facing the lake? Or is it
No, I think that's
facing out?
Whistler. That's coming in from
Oh,
Whistler.
did you? Okay, just the one, once a year.
This was the first fuel installation. The Flying Club, a few of them put their money together and they had this sort of an honor system. And they had some avgas there. They needed gas so they could fly their planes. Here's just another one of the planes landing. This is one of our airport openings. This is Colleen from Transport Canada. And we always brought our princess or Miss Karen into our little openings that we had. So cutting the ribbon on the gravel strip. And that's Don Walthall. Don just spent his life at that airport, actually.
Yeah.
Don was on council for many years as well. This is actually paving the airstrip. And as we were paving the airstrip, the premier actually happened to fly in with the cabinet minister and NRMP, and we needed more money to finish the paving, so I took him for a walk to the end of the runway, and we got some additional funding. This is the cabana that the school kids built, and this was chilly after one of the openings that we had. And of course, we always gave Pemberton potatoes. We had lots of
That's
fluff.
the cabana. See how it is?
And this was Premier Bennett. And I think the fellow in the gray was from Drive, from the Department of Regional Development. He's since passed away. John Reynolds is there, and this is Alex Fraser. Then this is Wayne McNeil, who did actually some of the studies that we had done, but again was on the Aviation Council. He had a consulting company, but this was an office that AirBC had, and it was the MLS Stoll Demonstration Project office that they had. So, and this is another different opening of the paved airstrip.
Wow.
Very strip from there.
Yeah.
So it's pretty nice.
Yeah, no buildings.
And that length is 4,000 feet.
There were turning Ds added to that.
Yes.
Yeah, but that's the first paving that was done. Then there's also a taxiway that was paved in here as well. That's Cherie LeBlanc.
Yeah.
This is for fencing.
Was it still all fenced? the
Still all
airport?
fenced. This is another opening. I can tell by my clothes. That was Mary Collins. Of course, this is still,
That's
this
gravel.
goes back a bit. This is a gravel strip here, this one, so. This was the MLS site on the Kim property.
Yeah, you were saying all the infrastructure's been torn down recently.
I just emailed the village today. I want to know what happened to it, and I listed everything that I know was around. And I said I really hope that it went to a good home, or else at least the village made some money out of it. I was glad at least 2 pieces were at the museum.